I'm Amanda Silver.
And I'm Alex Howard.
And this is Dirty Laundry.
So welcome to Dirty Laundry.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Today we are joined by Michelle Dorr, who is the Director of Development at JACS. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks for having me.
I've been doing a ton of research about your organization. I'm so excited to learn more and share this incredible organization with our listenership. And clearly you have been on this path of helping folks, the underserved, the underprivileged, the suffering, if you will, those that are facing bigger trials and tribulations than your average Joe.
100%.
You were like called to this kind of work.
I think so.
So before we get into the organization, let me first say, sadly, our girl Amanda Silver is out sick today.
I know.
So I am doing this solo, which is a first for me, but I'm very excited.
Oh.
And but secondly, I want to know about you, right? Like this kind of work, JACS as an organization, serving this community, it's not for the faint of heart.
No.
So where did your journey begin into this kind of work? So you were a teacher, obviously vice principal. You've been wanting to help people throughout your career.
Yes.
Like as a child, were you interested in this? Like what kind of little Michelle is coming out here in this work?
No, I think as a kid, I always thought I'd be a teacher.
Okay.
Which I did. And then I moved and I became a very young vice principal. I was a secondary school vice principal before the age of 30.
Wow.
So I did that. And, as many things changed during COVID, and we've talked a little bit about this, education changed greatly.
Big time. Oh, man.
And funding changed greatly.
Yeah.
And I saw the mental health of the staff and students deteriorate so much. And it was hard to be in that position. I remember during COVID when it first was COVID, March of 2020, and we thought we're coming back from March break and we're only going to be off for 2 weeks, right? We're going to be back in business.
So naive.
And I remember after the 2 weeks when we found out now it's indefinite.
Yeah.
I took it upon myself to start calling all of the teachers. I had 250 teachers at my school. I started calling each of them just to do check-ins.
Whoa.
To say, how are you doing? Do you need anything for your classes, for you? And I started getting this deep sense that people were not okay. Not okay, not just because of COVID, but I had like some of the teachers in my school who were in abusive relationships who now had no escape.
Yes.
Who were dealing with spouses or children with addictions.
Yeah.
And so I think this is where it sparked in me that we need more, we need to do more. And as the funding became less, I was like, I can't make the difference here that I want to make.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought I'd go into politics because, everything's answered in politics. And I started working.
Speaking of naivete.
Right? Exactly. And I started working for the Federal Liberal Party, not because I was a diehard liberal, but that's who was in power.
Yeah.
So I was running Ontario for the Federal Party.
Cool.
And I did that pretty much up until October 7th. And I no longer found myself as aligned with the political party.
Yeah.
And working in politics, even though there's politics in every job and every office, working in politics when you're not aligned with the party you work for is very difficult.
Yeah.
And since my job was to bring in all the funds for Ontario, all the events, and everything happening in Ontario fell under me, I was dealing with this like moral dilemma. And I said to my husband, I need to make a difference and I'm not making a difference here.
Yes.
And I found JACS.
I love it.
And now I feel, and it's like with every donor that I speak to and every potential donor and basically any person I speak to, I say, it's not just about raising money. Of course, that's important. We need to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
But if we can save a life together, our logo is a life raft. If I can get the word out so that people know we're here, the money will come because it's such a great organization. Yeah. And the people who have capacity to give will if they know about us. But also as importantly is people need to know we're here and what services we provide so that if people need help, they can get the help that they need.
Yeah. And education is empowering. I mean, we know that. So it sounds like you've really taken a holistic approach to this, right? You can see the trickle down effect.
Yes.
You can see how it affects relationships and families, any sort of mental health struggles.
Yes.
Your organization, now let's move into that, specifically focused on addiction.
Yes.
But even that is such an umbrella term.
It really is.
An umbrella of like what the impacts really are.
It is.
So as an organization, what kind of addictions are you servicing, supporting, working with?
It's a great question. So any type.
Okay.
There's substance abuse, of course.
Yeah.
But there's also sex addiction. And, one of the things we noticed here at JACS is that over 25% of our phone calls that we were getting were in relation to sex addiction.
Wow.
And so we
interesting.
trained 2 of our therapists to become CSAT, so certified sex addiction therapists, to make sure that we could properly service that community.
Smart.
Because one of the other things that we really pride ourselves on is ensuring that our clinical team is servicing at the highest level of service that we can give.
Wow.
So that's a huge part of what we do right now. We're actually one of the only organizations in Ontario to have so many certified sex addiction therapists on staff.
Yeah.
And 1 in 5 households is the statistic of somebody struggling with a sex addiction, which is crazy.
And who is calling you in that instance? Is it a family member?
Sometimes.
Is it the person themselves?
Sometimes.
A mixed bag.
So really when it comes to JACS, and we really try and get the word out about this, is that we support family members, friends, colleagues of people suffering from addictions.
Okay.
So it's not just the individual who's suffering, who of course we will support,
Sure.
but it's also anybody who's affected around them. Because as we know, addiction affects everyone.
It really does.
And, we get a lot of phone calls in from parents whose children have vaped, maybe once even, and they're scared and they don't know what to do and they don't know what conversations to have. JACS really works on 3 main pillars of support.
Okay.
So the first is education and outreach. We go into schools, universities, colleges. We do lunch and learns in office buildings.
Love that.
And we provide education around addiction. So we really cater to the age group. For example, grade 6s, we might do breathing exercises for anxiety.
I love it.
We might talk about addiction to technology. Kids always say they have no addictions. Well, you and I had a little pre-conversation about children's
I told you about my flip phones,
right?
and my angry kids.
Yeah. So that's addiction.
Definitely.
Your son is ineffectively in withdrawal.
Well, let me tell you, the reason, aside from reading The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who I'm telling everyone, please read, go read. My daughter came home, just anecdotally, she came home, she was having a rough day at school, something happened. And I'm like, come and sit and talk to me. I can see you're upset. What's going on? And of course, parents, we all know, the kids are like, nothing happened at school.
Of course.
I don't want to talk about it. She sat there and I was like, Bridget, please, I'm here to help. I can just sit in comfort. We can talk about it. We can come up with solutions. What do you need from me? And she was like, I don't want to talk about it. And she reached for her phone and immediately started numbing.
Right.
And I was like, oh, no.
Right.
I can see this. I myself do this. I will be the first to admit we are all addicted to our technology and to the distraction it provides. But she's 10.
Right. And are we using it? So we're very much on a harm reduction approach. We don't talk about abstinence or don't do this or don't do that. But
love that.
How do you ensure you're not using it to deal with anxiety or depression?
Yeah.
It's a slippery slope.
It is.
And so we really work on the education piece to teach students and individuals the skill set to ensure that they're not using it in negative ways.
So that's breathing. That's maybe talking about things.
Right. And so again,
Circles.
we really factor it to the age group. So grades 9 to 12 right now is huge on vaping and sports betting. We love when
Sports betting.
Okay, so this was crazy. So the clinical therapists are the ones who run the outreach, of course, and the education sessions. And I went to see it because I said, how do I sell something that I've never seen before?
Sure.
I have to see it.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in the room and it's a high school and it's grades 9 to 12 boys. And the therapist goes, so, who gambles? And all the kids go, not me, nobody, right? So she puts up a bunch of sports betting websites on the board and they're like, that one's outdated. You got to add this one. You got to add that one. And she's like, really? Nobody here gambles? She's like, because pretty sure you do.
That's
and so it's getting kids to recognize that sports betting is gambling.
Yeah.
Right? They don't see that connection, but we make that connection for them. And again, it's not saying don't do it, but it's how do you ensure you're doing it safely, appropriately, not using it as a bad habit forming? Are you setting limits for yourself? Are you stealing your parents' credit card? Or are you working and mowing lawns to pay for this habit? Or, all the things that could go along with it. So we don't charge for these education sessions.
Wow.
We rely on funding from donors and stuff to run them. But we really think that the foundation of education around addiction can be a preventative approach to ensuring kids don't slip into these bad habits when they're older.
So in terms of, if I may, just in case we do have listeners that are like, my kid's school needs this.
Yes.
I'm a principal.
Reach out to me.
And
Michelle at JACSToronto.org. I'll help set it up.
I love a good self-promotion.
Right?
But I know, for example, I'm on our parent council for my kid's school, and we do often have funding. Could they choose to pay you for, said service? Okay.
So we would say there's no fee, but make a donation to JACS.
Got it. Okay.
In any amount that you feel
like, pay what you can.
Exactly.
That's incredible.
And, that's part of our barrier-free access. And I'll go a little bit more into that and how we ensure we don't have barriers. But yes, absolutely. Brilliant. We will go to any schools. We also run parent information sessions. So say the parent council you're on says, like, we're really noticing in school we have a huge problem with technology and kids are yelling at teachers when they take it away, or whatever the case may be. Or maybe the parents are struggling at home. We can have our therapists come out and run a parent info session on technology and addiction, and help support the parent body. Yeah. So there's so many areas that we can help in. And again, we won't charge a fee for it, but if anybody can make a donation or has capacity, great, because that's what help funds it for people who can't afford it.
Yes,
right?
I love that.
And then the second thing we do is we have support groups. We have support groups over 20. Right now we have 26 that are running every single week. And we have a men's group, a women's group, an LGBTQ plus group. We also have Here to Help. So that's for friends and family members who know someone struggling with addiction.
Similar to like an Al-Anon kind of group?
Yeah.
Okay.
So nobody in that group actually has an addiction themselves, but rather they're a support group for people who are help supporting others who are struggling with addiction. The newest group that we have, which like blew my mind, is a grandparent support group. So I'm sure you've heard about all these grandparent scams that are happening in the news and all of that. Yeah. One of the things that's happening on the addiction side is grandchildren are being verbally and emotionally abusive to their grandparents to get money to pay for their addictions.
Right.
And so it's teaching those grandparents how to set proper boundaries, supports for them. Yeah. And so that's one of the groups. We really look to see what is happening in society where the need is, and we try to build groups. Those groups are all free.
What I really like about both of these two pillars is it's like incredibly inclusive, which is beyond, because as everybody knows, therapy, not inexpensive.
Not inexpensive.
It's a major barrier to entry.
Huge.
But also that with group approach, there's something so comforting in knowing you're not alone.
100%.
Right? Like Amanda and I run our divorce support group with this exact same mentality of like, come, you're not alone. There are others fighting this.
Yes.
Come see, like be seen, be heard, be validated. And I would imagine, especially for high school kids, where all they want to do is fit in and, sort of keep up with what's hip and what's happening, to be like, oh, that's actually not cool. And some of us don't want to do that. And now we can talk about it in an open forum and sort of destigmatize all of that.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly. And that's for every layer of support. Even the grandparents, knowing that I'm not the only one who suffered from this.
Because there's so much shame when you are the only one that you think you're the only one.
Or you think you're the only one. And so there's so much to be said about group therapy. And also a lot of things come up in group sessions. I mean, I'm not one of the therapists, but a lot of the things come up in group sessions that maybe wouldn't come up in an individual session. And so it gets people kind of like you said, thinking, oh, I'm not alone in that. Yeah. Oh, I don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed or any of those things. Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits to that.
And is it like anonymity part of that? Or could you then be like, oh, I just met so-and-so at this group. Now I have someone to talk to who understands, and we can sort of create our own relationship.
And I think that's the bigger piece, right? Yeah. Rather than being anonymous, the idea that we're here to help support one another. And the idea that you can build your community.
Yeah, I love it.
Right?
Amazing.
And then our last pillar of support is individual therapy. Okay. So what's great about our individual therapy is we're very strict that there's a no wait list policy, which is huge. Unheard of in Ontario. As we see, and we even had this discussion in one of our meetings today, to the clinical team, once you notice your caseloads are getting too big and you think we're going to start to have a wait list, let us know. We'll bring in other therapists to ensure we can keep up with that no wait list. Now, our CEO is in recovery. And one of the things he said, he was saved by JACS 20 years ago. And one of the things he says is, if there are any barriers to receiving support, including a lag in receiving that support, the moment might have been passed, which means he said, like, when I needed it, if I didn't get it that minute, that day, maybe I would have changed my mind.
100%.
So when somebody wants therapy, it's really important to us that they get it right when they need it. So we have no wait list. We also have barrier-free support. So an individual therapy session costs $180 an hour.
Okay.
But we offer it on a sliding scale.
Oh,
so if
great.
someone calls in and says they don't have any money, we don't question it. We don't ask for your T4 and anything like that. It's a, kind of an honor system, if you will.
Yeah.
But we provide that so that there are no barriers. Part of the reason is, number one, a lot of people can't afford therapy. Some people don't see the value in getting therapy at the beginning, but then they do later, and they can donate later once they see, right, the value or all of that. Also, we have a lot lot of kids who reach out to us and they don't have access to their parents' money or insurance or whatever else. And
are they doing it, I don't want to say in a sneaky basis, but like without their folks knowing?
Exactly.
Oh, amazing.
Like any other therapy, unless they're going to harm themselves or someone else, there's no obligation to tell their parents.
Phenomenal. I never thought of that.
Oftentimes kids need someone else to speak to other than their parents. Like if they've tried drugs and they're unsure, uncertain, they have questions, they're not going to go to their parents about it. And it's way better that they come to a therapist who is trained to answer those questions for them.
And so in terms of your clinicians then, you mentioned ones that are trained specifically in sex addiction. Yes. Is addiction generally a different kind of speciality?
It absolutely is. And so a lot of our therapists have certificates in different areas. And what they'll do with intake is they'll determine, out of our therapists, we have 2 psychotherapists, the rest are masters of social work individuals. They'll determine who's the best therapist to speak to that individual.
So someone who knows how to work with children, obviously are going to take the younger. Got it.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
Someone who works better with children, someone who works better with moms, right? Someone who works our clinical director will work hard to make sure that people are fit with therapists that will best suit their needs.
That's incredible.
The quality of care is extremely important to us, and also ensuring that we can provide the care. So if somebody calls in and it's not something that we cover here at JACS, they will provide where you can go, what help you can get. So it is still a great place to contact first, because we can help navigate the system with
even
you.
Just a resource hub. Exactly. So you mentioned your CEO 20 years ago. How long have you guys been established?
So great question. JACS started in the year 2000.
Okay.
And it started really because a bunch of Jewish men got together and said, we don't want to go to church basements for AA meetings.
Fair.
Right? I don't want to walk in there with my kippah. That's how it started.
Yeah.
They started support groups, and 24 years later, here we are, and it's changed tremendously. So now we really focus on helping in all areas of addiction. We have the outreach, we have the support groups, so we also have the individual therapy. So we've really transformed since then in the last 24 years. I'm their first ever director of development. Right. So in 24 years, they've never had somebody in charge of fundraising and developing the organization.
But the need is there now.
The need is now there. Our therapists are growing every single day. We're actually looking right now to hire a male therapist on our team.
Yeah,
it's
that's
a need
important.
that we really feel we could use another one on board to help service some of the phone calls that we're getting in where we realize that's a need. So,
and are you still serving the Jewish community?
Not solely.
Okay.
So yes, we are Jewish addiction community services. And we don't just service the Jewish community. I like to think of JACS as like upholding Jewish values, right? So Tikkun Olam, tzedakah, we give back, we care about everyone, we work hard to care for everyone. However, when someone calls in, we don't say, and what's your religious affiliation?
Right. Just like you don't ask their T4, you don't need to have proof of your baptism or...
And in fact, we've asked our therapists to kind of give us a general sense of who do you think we're servicing? So we think it's about 70-30 Jews to non-Jews based on names and what people have disclosed. But again, that's not an accurate statistic because we don't ask if you're Jewish or not, and it's irrelevant to us.
Absolutely.
We really don't care.
Well, it's irrelevant to your addiction,
Well, addiction doesn't only happen in one community. Addiction happens throughout all communities, and we're here to help all communities. So, anybody and everyone who needs support, we're here to help.
I would have to imagine, though, that after October 7th, there was probably a rise within your community of people needing additional resources or turning to substance abuse or Yeah.
Absolutely. And the crazy part about that too is as I called to donors and they're like, well, I would love to donate, but I'm supporting Israel.
Right.
And I always use the analogy of being on an airplane where they say, put your oxygen mask on before helping others. Here in Toronto, the Jewish community is not strong right now.
Yeah.
We are not okay.
No.
We aren't anywhere in the world, but we're not okay here.
Yeah.
And in order to support Israel and in order to support the Jewish diaspora all over the world, we need to strengthen ourselves. And part of that is getting support for mental health and addictions. And so I say, like, let's make ourselves stronger here so that we can do more for them.
Yeah.
But we're struggling.
Yeah.
And I agree money has to go to my husband's Israeli. Of course, I see the value.
Yeah.
My kids are all Israeli. We love going there. Last year we were there for a month. We see, the values there for me too. I have tons of family and friends there. And of course that's important, but we need to be strong here and we're not right now. And so I keep saying to donors, like, we have to put our oxygen masks on because we're not there. And once we do that, and once we're our best selves, we can do so much more for them.
So let's go back to that. What is the sort of trickle down effect? And again, I know you're not a clinician, you're not a therapist, so we'll be very...
Yes, I'm the development team.
Yeah, exactly. Broad strokes, but in this organization, I'm sure you see the effects that addiction can have on families and on communities, right? It's relationships, big, small, families of origin, your nuclear family, your work family.
100%. Well, I mean, financial is an obvious one, right? That families can struggle financially. Kids and spouses can struggle emotionally.
Yeah.
Sometimes they might not know what it is that's happening. They might not even realize.
Yeah.
And so that's why we work really hard on that education piece.
And within that education piece, I can't get over that it's just available and free of charge.
Yeah.
So I'm so delighted by that.
Right.
We are so much of the mindset that education leads to empowerment. Information is how you stay safe,
100%.
How you can take care of yourself. Often that is ending a relationship if it's not tenable within, the confines of this person is not getting help or is getting help or whatever. It's just maybe not meant to be.
For sure.
Again, I know you're not giving this advice per se to clients, but are there times when it's like, you actually need to get out and we're going to support you doing that? Or is it simply a education piece of providing information, providing resources, and then allowing them to do it on their own sort of time and at their own pace?
I mean, I think therapy is like giving someone a toolbox.
Okay.
Right? It's not building a house for them, but it's giving them all the tools to build their own house.
Teach a man to fish.
Right? So it's so that when things happen, they know what to pull from and what skill set to use to work with it. So I'm not on the clinical team, but I can say I really believe we're of the mindset of we're teaching you the tools.
Right.
And I think that goes a much longer way of helping people than, we can't make decisions for anyone. You can't make anyone do anything. But you can give them information and you can give them examples and you can teach them. If you're your best self, if you're your healthiest self, then you're going to make the right decisions. Yeah. But if you're not in your best place, you can't. You're not capable of it in those moments. And so I truly believe it's about giving the tools.
I love that. And in terms of the, let's say, sort of divide between the three pillars that you discussed, is it a third? Is it heavily weighted more on the education or the groups or the therapy?
I think it's about a third.
Amazing.
I would say it's pretty even. Even like our clinical team makes up most of the organization. So that's over half the organization, right? Yeah. And we spend very little on operations because we really want to pump our money into the clinical side of the organization to make sure that it's as strong as it could be, providing it as many resources as it possibly can. And that's what they brought me in for, to get the word out so that people know we're here, we're available, so we can do more outreach and education, so we can have more support groups and we can service more people on individual therapy basis. But also we run events to gain sponsorships from businesses and individuals to help pay for all of these amazing things. So we really rely on those who have the capacity in the community to give in order to support those who don't.
So if you're listening and you have a business that wishes to sponsor to make this incredible organization thrive
100%.
And help so many people. I read on your website you helped over almost 1,500 individuals last year.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And in our group sessions, I think the number was 9,000 last year.
Wow.
Or that would be in the 2022, 2023. We're just coming out with our 2023 to 2024 stats.
So you're getting more bang for your buck in the group dynamic, obviously, versus the one-on-one.
Yeah.
Would you say that is where people come mostly to initially and then it parlays into
I think it
individual?
goes both ways. I think
Okay.
there's some who start with the individual and then move to the groups as continuous support. And I think there's some that might start in a group and realize they need some one-on-one.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of interchangeable. Like
Okay.
it just depends how somebody starts getting involved, and it depends on the individual. Some people aren't comfortable starting in a group, right? Think about who you are as a person, right?
Fair.
I'm very outgoing. I love being in a group. I love,
Right.
I can talk one-on-one. I can
Drama
talk in a group
teacher,
of 6,
yeah.
right? Whatever. A group of 60, a group of 300. I'll get up on
Right.
stage. I'll say whatever, right? That's me. But
Yeah.
some people are not me.
Yeah.
And one of my sons is so shy. And I always say to my husband, like, it's so hard for me to understand him. Like when he gets embarrassed and I can see it happening on his face, and I'm like, don't be embarrassed. Like mommy will do something sillier,
Yeah.
I've just never been an embarrassed person. So I think it's also dependent on somebody's personality where they might benefit the most.
Yeah.
If somebody's going to sit quietly in a group and not partake and feel withdrawn and not connect, maybe it's better for them to be an individual. And then maybe once they have the skill set, move to the group. So just depends.
So for those of us, I say us because I'm 100% in this group, who's picturing like your church basement kind of AA, sit in a circle, hi, I'm Alex, I'm an alcoholic, whatever that looks like for them. Is that a similar vibe?
It depends on the group.
I just find that if I am a highly anxious person, I'm probably like your son who's incredibly shy. I love to know what I'm walking into.
For sure.
So what I'm picturing is like a work back of if I need this kind of service and I want to show up, I'm terrified because of the unknown.
For sure.
So what does that look like?
So great question. So during COVID, all of our groups moved online.
Sure.
Now we are this is brand new. You guys are getting like firsthand knowledge. We just got a space for in-person groups.
Wow.
So we're going to be bringing some back in person.
good.
But we had our first in-person group last week that we've had
Okay.
since COVID. And it was the Here to Help group for those who have family members, friends, or colleagues struggling from addiction. And there was sushi.
Amazing.
There was food.
Okay, so this is not your typical church basement of stale donuts and gross coffee.
No.
Wow.
No. And it was mingling.
Oh.
And it was, so people could get to know each other, and then there was talking.
Oh,
so
interesting.
it really depends on the group.
Okay.
I know I've asked the therapists about this, and they've said, like, for the first group, if you want to have your camera off till you get a little bit more
sure.
comfortable kind of thing,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Minus our Restoring Intimacy group, which is for our sex addiction group. We do not allow cameras off in that group at all for safety reasons. But in terms of the other groups, there usually is that option for the first one, but we are moving them back in person, and we're going to make sure the space is super inviting and super amazing. And all of our therapists are really we work really hard at JACS to make sure that every person that works in the organization, we're like a family.
Yeah.
So you really have to fit within the family structure. And so we all really work well together. And so I think that we can all be reflective of who JACS is and what we do. And so our therapists are really great at making a welcoming, comfortable environment.
That's beautiful.
But that's not to say that typical AA meetings aren't successful, and they are. And there's something to be said about that.
Right.
I've heard that there's actually 2 kinds. I've learned so much since I've moved into the
please
space. But
share.
for AA, there's closed meetings and there's open meetings.
Okay.
So a closed meeting is what you're talking about, where you sit in a circle, and those are only for addicts.
Right.
Whereas an open meeting, anybody can attend. And those are kind of where you're looking at a speaker, and they'll have somebody speak. And it could be informational. It could be an addict. And so there are 2 types of meetings, but the AA program itself has been so successful. And some of our members go to AA meetings in addition to our meetings. And so it really just depends on the need and what the group is about.
Right,
so
fair.
a group that is strictly about a substance addiction might work. I hate saying for sure because it's not, I can't give firsthand experience, but from what I've heard, what I've learned, what I've seen can be and is very successful. Whereas some of our other groups, like the Here to Help, that wouldn't be the structure.
Yeah, fair. And so they're led by a clinician or a therapist.
Yes.
And so again, picturing myself at one of these meetings, we're mingling and then we sit down, and then are they asking us questions? Are they sharing anecdotes? Are people invited to share?
Both.
All of the above.
All of the above.
Okay.
And really, it's like when you're teaching a class, you kind of feed off of the audience. So you kind of see what people need in the moment, right? And what that looks like.
I love that.
Yeah.
And is the expectation that you show up week after week? Do you ever graduate from this program maybe?
So it's a great question. I think there's never an expectation or a requirement. You would never be shamed if you show up, shamed if you don't. It's come when you need it, when you can.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In terms of individual therapy, we don't have a deadline, but we do try to come up with a plan per person with when we feel they can be,
released back into the wild.
Right. For lack of a better term, yes.
Yes.
When we feel that they are ready to move on just to groups or that they've received the help that they need. But it's different for every person.
Individually. So the individual therapy might then graduate into a group setting.
It might.
Or vice versa,
Exactly.
I suppose. Right.
And it just depends on the person and it depends on what they're struggling with and all the other millions of things that could go along with it, because really there's no blanket approach. It's a case by case, person by person, individual by individual. And you can think about yourself and your experiences, how that will change from me, from anybody else in this building, right?
Yeah.
So it's really an individualized approach.
Well, and that's the funny thing about group therapy, I guess, is that and listen, I see this in the divorce world as well. We all think we're, these unique snowflakes, very individual, but there's so much commonality in our suffering, in our, addictions in this instance.
Well, and if you have anything in common, like you and I sat down today and we both have kids and husbands. And so we start talking, automatically we've got something to connect on.
There's rapport, there's trust.
And automatically there's something similar between us that we can relate on, right? And I think the groups are the same thing. There's going to be something that's connecting everyone. Yeah. And that's going to be the foundation.
Right.
But your kids are a different age from mine. Your husband's in a different career. We grew up in different places. All the differences start coming out, but it doesn't mean that you can't start with that commonality. So that's
quite frankly, my hope would be that the whole world could start with the commonalities.
Right.
Because again, if you look at a global perspective,
totally,
we all are in some way connected, whether it's kids, life experiences, your community, what have you. There's more similarities than differences, and yet all we do is fight about the differences. But we're not going to go down that road because that is a different conversation. But yeah, we need to focus on where we are similar and how we can connect on those.
Exactly.
And that normalizes it. That destigmatizes it.
And I think, and that's just it, right? We're working still so hard to break the stigma. It's surprising when I speak to people and they say to me, like, don't people want to be associated? Don't they want their name up on the JACS wall and this and that, like they do for other Jewish organizations? And with there's still a stigma when it comes to addictions and mental health. We're still working at breaking that stigma down because a lot of people think, well, if I'm one of the big donors at JACS and people know, are they going to assume that I have a child or a spouse or a family member who's suffering from addiction? And my answer is, so what if they do, right? Why is that a bad thing? Why is that a negative thing? But it still is.
I hear you.
And so we're working to break that down. And part of that starts with the education piece and saying like, well, your children are addicted to technology, as are mine. Yeah. Listen, my 3-year-old son, last night, my husband and I were watching TV downstairs and we think all 3 kids are upstairs sleeping and I hear little footsteps. I'm like, I think one of them's awake. My husband's like, no, they're just going to the bathroom. We come upstairs and my 3-year-old son is in my room. He has turned on the Google Home, which I hide in my bedroom because of this. And he's sitting there watching. Wow. And when and I'm like, what are you doing? Are you allowed to do this? And he's like, no. So I turned it off and the withdrawal, just the crying and the screaming. And I wasn't done with the show and the hyperventilating. And there was 5 minutes left. I'm like, do you even know what 5 minutes is? You're 3. He's like, freaking out and all the things. And I'm like to my husband, he's in withdrawal. So it's like learning the language and understanding that like, that is addictive behavior. And I was like, we need to nip this in the bud. Like Google Home is going up on the 12th shelf. Like he ain't, he's not finding it tonight. But, it's real. And so it's learning to recognize those signs and it's learning to understand what they are and see it for what it is. And you said you saw it with your daughter with the numbing with her phone. And it's scary because if we don't take time to notice that and if we don't look for these signs, where does it go?
Yeah. And exactly that. Do addictions lead to then further, is it something where it's like almost a domino effect of
it's addictive behavior?
Right. You keep topping up.
Right. And you can move from one thing to another when it's not being met by one.
Right. What are you replacing it with?
Right. And it's the same with drug addiction. Think when people move from some drugs and then that drug's not doing it for them anymore. So they move to a harsher drug and then that drug's not doing it. And so then, they spiral like anything. Yeah. When something's no longer doing it for us, we move to something else.
And it is heartbreaking. We have all seen families' lives been like destroyed by addiction.
Yes.
And why is it, speaking of stigma, that, you know, you and I as moms, and I do this with a ton of other parents, you know, we can joke about our kids' addiction to screen time.
Right.
I mean, for starters, we gave it to them. Right. So like we are at fault.
Right.
Let's just be totally transparent. But then if it's some other kind of substance, all of a sudden now we're dealing with it behind closed doors.
Right.
As parents, we're embarrassed. We don't want to let people know. Meanwhile, it's like, hey, I'm just going to pour my mommy juice and fill my goblet of wine. But that's not addictive behavior.
Exactly.
That's not, you know.
Totally.
Is there almost a hierarchy of addictions? You see them all.
Totally.
So which ones are like so frowned upon that people are the most embarrassed? Because the point of this, not just to be salacious, but to say, hey, listeners out there, if you've got something, here's a safe space. It doesn't matter what the addiction is.
100%.
But I would imagine there are ones. So for those listening that maybe are struggling with something, what can they come to you with? Is it everything?
Everything. Any type of addiction.
Like
any
what?
type
Say
of,
more.
So
We mentioned, obviously, drugs and alcohol. Assuming gambling.
Technology.
We touched on
gambling. Sex addiction is huge. But it maybe isn't just you suffering from it. It's maybe your spouse.
Right.
And it's maybe you haven't recognized that that's what it is. Right?
So would someone come then maybe with just like a generic
concern.
I'm struggling in my relationship, but I don't know why. And then you peel away the layers.
And that's the thing. Like they might, you know, there's once you do the intake call with the therapist, they're at a much better level to speak to this, but they will determine what kind of supports you need.
Okay.
And so I think sometimes we don't, like you said, mom juice. I think sometimes we don't recognize. I know one of my good friends, her son is in school and they said, what's your mommy's favorite drink? And he wrote wine. Yeah. And she's posting it on Facebook and we're all finding this hilarious.
I mean, it is a little bit, but yes.
You know, I get ya. Yeah. I'm on the same page, right?
Exactly.
But at the same point, like you said, well, is there a conversation to be had that we're normalizing that?
We are definitely normalizing.
Right? And then why is it? What if he had put, you know, my mom's favorite drink is vodka?
Yeah.
Would we feel the same way? Probably not.
You're so
We'd probably
true.
be like, ooh, you know, that mom's got a...
Yeah.
You know, would the school be calling her and saying like, you know, this is a concern?
Yeah.
So it's like, why do we have stigmas in some ways and not others? Why do we say like, oh, you know, someone's smoking pot, that's fine, or cannabis, or I should use the proper terminology, someone's smoking cannabis, that's not such a concern, but they did coke?
Yeah.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, why is cannabis not a problem, right?
Totally.
And so we as a society determine what's normalized and what's not, and part of that is what's legal and what's not.
Fair.
And part of, right, as marijuana or cannabis, became legal.
Yeah.
We determined as a society that it's okay. It's kind of like, this is so relevant for you, but if you look at the statistics of when divorce became legal, it was like a upward spiral, and then it went down for many years. And people said, why was divorce so high in that, you know, those first 5 years? Well, because it was normalized.
Yeah.
All these people who for years were like, I want to get away from my spouse and suffering, whether in abusive relationships or other things, all of a sudden we're like, I can do this. This is accepted. Yeah. This is normalized. And so everybody was like, I'm on board. I'm getting a divorce. And then once it just became, well, it's there, it, you know, tapers off. But as we normalize things, it loses stigma, which is great in some ways. Like divorce is not stigmatized. Excellent. Well, fine. But I know
on the road too, hopefully.
But I'm saying not as stigmatized as it would have been 30 years ago, 40 years ago, right? We're coming a long way where kids can say my parents are divorced in class and people aren't like, oh,
yes.
You know,
no, totally.
From a divorced household.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? My 5-year-old has kids in his class who are divorced and he's like, oh, sometimes with their mom, sometimes they're with their dad. You know, he gets it, right? But what I'm saying is as these things become normalized, like cannabis being legal, we assume as a society, great, in some ways the stigma is removed, but in other ways it's a slippery slope kind of, you know, kind of like, well,
chasing the high.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. I think we still have a long way to come at removing stigma, but I think that's why some things are more stigmatized than others.
And I think that's why I love your first pillar of education.
Yeah.
Of like, and you know, we talk about kids and how great they are at adapting.
Yes.
Oh, you got 2 dads? Cool.
Yeah.
I got 2 moms. Oh, you only got 1 parent? You got grandparents that are raising you? Like whatever your family looks like.
Whatever your family
The kids
structure.
are so cool. They're so easy.
Yes.
It's coming from us as saying adults.
Of course.
With all of our baggage and all of our dramas and, you know, whatever, planting these ideas and othering.
100%.
And so you going in at the school level.
Yes.
This is what excites me the most.
Yes.
We've recently had an issue at school with technology and sort of access even within our school and all of the, you know, safety parameters they've set up. Things snuck in
100%.
and you know, people were exposed to things that they shouldn't have been. And it is a scary world.
Yes.
And I want to give people the benefit of the doubt that a lot of times it's fear-based.
For sure.
They are so afraid for their kids,
100%.
for their partner,
Yes.
for their lives,
Yes.
right? Because what does my life look like?
And the perception of others on your life.
Exactly.
Right? We care so much about what
Yep.
everybody else thinks.
We care so much, not to mention our, you know, online personas. And I say that intentionally because the online versus reality thing, like, it's a dichotomy for a reason.
For sure.
And so now what do we post? It's great to have a laugh about your wine, you know, as your favorite drink in and amongst the schoolyard. But like, what does that actually mean?
Right.
And where does that go?
Right.
So breaking down those stigmas is really, really crucial. So
and having the conversations.
Yes.
Having the conversations.
Yeah. And I think
is
giving
huge.
people the benefit of the doubt, right?
Yeah.
Like find that childish, you know, innocence
Yeah.
within all of us to just see people for face value, not for all the baggage that we want to, you know, unload onto them.
Totally. When I was a drama teacher, we did a play called All You Really Need to Know You Learned in Kindergarten.
Amazing.
And my kids put it on. I actually acted in it in grade 12 and then I redid it when I was teaching grade 12.
That's adorable.
And anyways, the first scene of the play is like, who can sing? Who can dance? Like ask a kindergarten class who can sing, every hand goes up. Who can every hand goes up. Who can play ball? Every hand goes up. Then ask that same question to a group of adults and everybody's like, I can't sing. Like, oh, you don't want to see me dancing or like I sing in the shower, you know? And it's true. We start putting these barriers and limitations and then when the kids hear that we use them, it adds it to their dichotomy and their, you know?
Man, it's sad. If only we could just be as
innocent
and beautiful
and have
as
nap
little
time
life.
every day and milk and cookies in the afternoon.
Oh my God, it's amazing. See, don't you miss that life?
Right? But we can do meditations in the afternoon.
Fair.
And we have wellness groups. That's part of what we offer is just everyday wellness and mindfulness. And we had running a trauma-informed yoga group.
Wow.
And I actually said, like, can't we have any of these for the staff?
Right.
And we're starting a staff meditation group.
That's
one day a week for
amazing.
20 minutes. That's going to be led by one of our therapists. And it's so important because we're a mental health organization that helps so many other people. But the impact that it has on us too, right? Like I've had so many people trauma dump on me, right? Like I'll call a donor and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, I've learned about their entire life and how they're suffering from addictions and they've never gotten help. And I'm the first person they've spoken to. And I'm so honored that they feel comfortable to share it with me, but I'm not a therapist. And so off the bat, I'm like, I got to set you up with, you know, I don't want to give you any advice. But at the same point, it's, you know, the Jewish society right now as a whole is going through vicarious trauma through what's happening around the world. And it's kind of the same thing when you hear all of these things. You internalize you're human, right? And so it's same thing, putting on your oxygen mask before you help other people, right? We have to practice what we preach. And I think that's so important. And I think everyone can benefit from mindfulness and everyone can benefit from these meditations. And I had a high school teacher who made us do meditations. And I remember we always laughed at him. Like, why is he making us do these affirmations? And I went to a public school. Like, what are you trying to preach on us,
He was way ahead of his time.
He was way ahead of his time. And I actually went back. I was the vice principal at my own high school. And he was still working there. And I was like, I have to tell you the impact that it had on me. Like I kept that affirmation, even though I found it silly at the time. And I, you know, so
that's incredible.
Yeah. But we need to have these conversations and we need to bring them to the forefront and get these tips and tricks and things that kids can use. Because if they have the tools in their toolbox to be mindful, to self-reflect, then maybe they won't go to the technology and use it for numbing. They can do it in a healthier, more manageable way.
Yeah. This really comes back to the beginning of like this holistic approach, right? It is about the community at large.
Yes.
It is an individual basis, maybe in terms of the therapy, but really that trickle down effect.
Absolutely.
So
that's why we
huge.
say addiction affects everybody.
Yeah.
It affects parents. It affects your kids. It affects your spouse. It affects your parents, your family members, your colleagues, your friends. Basically, anybody who's interacting with you can have an effect from it. And we support all of those people.
I was going to say, who are you turning away?
I never want to say we turn away.
I know, but
people,
there's somebody you can't be servicing.
Right.
It sounds too good to be true, Michelle.
Really, like our focus is addiction.
Right.
Anything related to addiction and anything related to, we would love to help everyone with every area of mental health. And if anybody's listening out there who has big funds that they want to give, we will hire therapists in all these specialized areas and gladly give support to everyone. But right now, the money that we have, we allocate for addictions. Okay. So anybody who is in any way connected to addictions, family members, friends, colleagues, spouses,
children.
It could be the parents, really anybody. Really anybody who's impacted.
And I like this a lot because I see it in my practice constantly of the parents are so afraid when they're going through a divorce about the trauma on the kids.
Of course.
And of course, I'm always saying, yes, this is a very difficult.
It is.
Of course, that goes without saying. They're not impacted by the divorce. They're not traumatized, I should say. Of course, always impacted by the divorce itself. It's the everything else that comes with it.
Of course.
So it's the high conflict. It's the fighting. And then the parents of these sweet, innocent children are then worried about how are they coping. And so I think this is when we're seeing a lot of addictions. Of
course.
And some kind of addictive behavior.
Of course.
As a means of coping with
100%.
The difficult situation.
And I would urge all those parents to call.
Great. That was exactly my question. Brilliant.
Because speak to a therapist.
Yes.
Get professional advice on how to deal with your child, what strategies you can use. Depending on the age of the child, maybe getting them involved also in groups or in individual therapy, but start with the parents.
And so does it have to be an instance of, I'm noticing now my, let's say, child or partner or mother or whomever is addicted? Or could it be a precursor to? Okay.
So I told you, we had someone call in who said, my kids vaped once.
Yes.
And
obviously not addicted after one.
Of course, they're not
terrifying.
Not necessarily. They might be, but they're not necessarily addicted after one time of vaping. However, the mother wanted support on what to do, and we are there to support. So it could be the precursor to addictive behaviors. I'm foreseeing this. I'm experiencing that. In many cases, you will find out that one of the spouses had some type of addictive behavior. I'm sure you see this in your practice, but as a teacher, I was always disclosed by kids that a parent was having an affair that they knew about, that the other spouse didn't, and what do I do and who do I speak to? And so I'm sure there's a lot more when the layers are uncovered.
The genetics. I think it's Brene Brown that says genetics loads the gun and then like trauma pulls the trigger.
Totally.
So we have potentially all 100%. Of this within us. And how does it come out?
For sure.
Talk to me about confidentiality.
Yes.
Obviously, we know patient-client or patient-doctor confidentiality, of course, so with therapy, sure. Yes. And of course, there's the duty to report, which again, anybody, in this industry understands that.
Yes.
Group sessions.
Yes. So by joining onto a group, like you don't have to put your last name and things like that, but people will see your face.
Right.
And so you obviously have to accept that people in the group will know. But as with any group, it's nothing leaves here.
Okay.
Nothing leaves the group. And it's the same as AA.
Yeah.
If you see someone out on the street, you're not saying, hey, saw you at an AA meeting. Say, hi, how are you? But you're not disclosing to other people where you know them from.
Yes.
It's up to people to self-disclose. Yeah. That's their decision. But what we find is as people get more comfortable and as they have the tools, they will be comfortable saying, I'm in recovery or I'm a supporter or I'm this or I'm that.
Right.
You had said one other thing about duty to report. So I went over that. But I'll tell you, even on the operations standpoint, our operations team has no idea who we service on the clinical side. I don't even have access to our clinical data. So we have Clinico is the name of our clinicians.
Okay.
I don't have access to it. I only know who donates. I don't know who attends sessions. So for me, I can even say confidently within our own building, and of course I have confidentiality agreements that I've signed, but I don't know who's serviced through JACS. So I can be in reality speaking to you here today and have no clue that you're a patient here.
Right.
And have no idea.
Right.
And you might think that I do. And I think that's an often misconception. A lot of people self-disclose to me and I'm like, well, I had no idea. They're like, really? And I'm like, how would I know? And they're like, well, can't you see in the system?
Would assume.
I can't. And so we do.
And that's by design.
By design. We work really hard here to ensure confidentiality at every level. So our operations team, while we work very closely with the clinicians and we're very close as like a tight-knit family, we do not know who they're servicing. And that's really important because the last thing that we'd want is people to feel they can't get support because they're embarrassed or they don't want people to know about it. I can assure you that nobody knows.
That's really good.
Yeah, which is huge. And I told you, we have a lot of kids. And, I know that our clinicians, they've told me they've worked with like high school guidance counselors to provide their office at lunch so that the kid can go in and zoom in. So nobody knows.
Oh, wow.
It's during the day. It's, So there's lots of opportunities for anonymity depending on who you are and where you're located and all those things.
As much as I poo-poo like the online world and what it's done to us as a society, this gives me some delight, right? Because there are
benefits. There are benefits, right? We always talk about the negative aspects of technology. And while there's a lot, and there is this whole movement now, and there's been a lot of people writing about it on LinkedIn, but there's this whole movement now to move back into the offices, to build connections. Right. We're craving it as a society. We need these connections. Yeah. Seeing you here in person today, game changer.
The best.
Think about on COVID, we would have been doing this over a screen. Totally different conversation. Totally different dynamic. So I'm grateful that we've come away from that. However, there's a lot to be said about accessibility. And we've realized when we moved to Zoom during COVID, now we're not just servicing people at the specific Wilson and Shepherd area.
Right.
We are servicing all over the GTA and in other places in the province. So people who can't access us physically, or students who can't get here, don't want their parents to know where they're going, are embarrassed, are ashamed, are all the different things, can now access us privately from wherever. They could be in the bathroom at a McDonald's zooming in with their therapist. Nobody would know.
Nobody knows.
Right?
That's amazing.
So we do have to realize those successes when it comes to technology and how it creates a whole piece of access.
Yeah. And with therapy, as we know, access is everything.
Everything. Well, again, when I talk about barrier-free, it's not just financial barriers, it's any barriers. Barrier being you can't get to the therapy. Barrier, of course, financial. Barrier being your own, thoughts about therapy. Barriers work in so many different ways. Barrier being a wait list, right?
Yes. And so you are working to get rid of
all
of
the
that.
barriers.
That's incredible.
Yeah, like I had one donor say to me, well, how do you know that some of the people that you're servicing can't afford it?
Right.
How do you know that? I said, I don't know that.
You'll never know.
But what I can tell you is if they can't afford it and they're not paying for it, that's because their money is going to service their addiction. It's they don't see the value in putting money towards therapy.
Right.
But that will change.
Yeah.
I've seen and I've heard within our organization that some people didn't pay for their first 3 sessions, but then started back paying.
That's wild.
Right? Because it's like once they see the value, once they realize and they're healthy, of course they're going to invest in this. But people don't see it at the beginning. So that's a barrier that we remove. And we try not to say pay nothing. We try to say pay what you can because we really want you to see accountability, and value.
Yeah.
And so even if the value is $5, $15, $20, $30, $50 an hour, whatever it is, it helps make a value towards it. And we try to get you to value your therapy. However, 180 might be just totally out of your range.
No, I
and
love that.
That's a lot.
That's a really fair point. And what I like the most is, again, through my trauma lens, folks that are maybe in domestic violent relationships, where they don't actually have control over their finances.
Right.
They could be married to a billionaire.
100%.
But they are on a fixed allowance, potentially. Like we see tons of financial abuse.
100%.
So I love that. How can you justify? You can't even tell your partner maybe that you're going, let alone here's my $200
for it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the same goes for kids. Their parents could have tons of money, but if they're not telling their parents are coming for therapy and we don't want them to feel they have to, then we can't put a financial barrier on it and say, well, we know your parents can afford it. Well, no, it doesn't mean that you can.
Exactly.
Right.
And you're the individual that needs the help.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we really try and remove all barriers. And I think that's just so important. And that's where I see my role really come in is by bringing funds into the organization, by getting the word out there, we can continue to keep those barriers removed.
Yeah. So last, what do you need our listeners to know? Anything that I've not asked you that you want to share that's really important?
honestly, I just get the word out there. If they're at a dinner party tonight and somebody mentions something about addiction, and now you can say, well, I know about JACS.
Love it.
And I know that they're here to help.
Yeah.
And we can save a life together, then it's everything.
I know.
So, great if people have capacity to give. And thank you. You can go to JACSToronto.org, make a donation, email me, Michelle, JACSToronto.org. If you have capacity, if you have a business, you want to get sponsorships and all the things. But if you need help or you know someone who needs help, reach out.
Yeah,
because we're here.
Yeah.
And that's really the main thing. I say that to every donor. I say, if you have $180 to give, great. You've just paid for 1 hour of therapy for someone who can't afford it themselves. But if you have no money to give, that doesn't mean capacity can't change later in life. But more importantly, you know that we're here.
Exactly.
And you're able to spread the word. That's all I ask is spread the word, because still so many people don't know we exist and we can't save lives if they don't know that we're here.
Yeah, you can't do this incredible work if nobody comes to you.
Right.
What an amazing organization. And
Thank you.
I am so happy that now at least there are more people that know about it.
Me too.
And hopefully can help continue to support you.
And thank you guys for what you're doing and getting the word out about so many organizations because it's so important.
Listen, it takes a village.
It totally does.
All of this work, anytime anyone's going through something difficult, you're not alone.
Never
alone.
That
is my whole mission in the world.
Alone.
Yes. Yeah. And if you don't have family or friends to turn to because of complicated relationships or simply because they're not there, that's okay. There are other people.
100%.
There are other organizations like JACS. And thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was written and created by Alex Howard and Amanda Silver, produced, edited, and engineered by RTF Productions. Make sure to rate and review our show if you loved it, and give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you stream your podcast to stay up to date on all upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening, and go easy on us. We're not your ex.